Hi there, this is Elise Bennin, your marketing mentor. And this is the podcast for you if and only if you are ready to leave the feast or famine syndrome behind, and I mean for good. If you've been wanting to productize your creative service, then this episode is for you. I'm talking to Lidia Varesco Racoma. She's a brand strategist, designer, and content creator who specializes in nonprofits. And we covered a lot of ground, from what she learned from her dad about running a business, to how she chose her nonprofit niche, to how she turned what she knew into a product and is ready to bring it to market. So listen and learn. All right. Welcome, Lidia, to the podcast.
Thank you, Elise. I'm happy to be here.
Me too. And as I always do, just go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yes. So I'm Lidia Varesco Racoma of Lidia Varesco Design in Chicago. I'm a brand strategist and marketing designer. I'm also a speaker and instructor. So I do nonprofit branding and marketing webinars, workshops, conference sessions, courses, and coaching. As I mentioned, I work mostly with mission-focused organizations, so nonprofits, associations, higher ed, social enterprise, basically any other company that might align with my values. And I will be celebrating 24 years in business in a couple
Wow.
weeks.
You don't look it, Lidia.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
You look awesome. And wow, 24. Congratulations. That's huge.
I believe it. Thank you.
And so maybe just tell us a little bit about the story of your business and how and why and maybe when you chose the nonprofit kind of mission-oriented world.
Yes, it's kind of a nice story because I started out my business, as we know, 24 years ago. And I was, this was before I had kids and was married and all of that. So I did do some nonprofit work at that time and some higher ed work. And then I sort of took a departure, went into some restaurant design work. I was a bit of a generalist. And then my first child was born. I guess that would be about, 10 years after I started my business. And I really started to think about how do I want to make my work improve the world somehow, make it a better place for this child, that's come into the world. And so at that point, I kind of looked at my body of work and I realized, I used to do, when I was first working as an intern even, I worked in a design studio and we would work on projects for a conservation nonprofit and for the School of the Art Institute and University of Chicago here in Chicago and other kind of educational organizations. So I thought, well, that work was really cool. I have experience. So I sort of came full circle from like where I started, really decided to, thanks to you, Elise, and, attending some of your webinars, I realized I need to pick my niche. And I thought, nonprofit is going to be it, and I'm going to go full force. And so I started really, focusing on working with those kinds of clients, with mission-focused clients. I'm involved in an association here in Chicago that serves nonprofit consultants. I've even served on committees for other associations. So I'm really just, I can understand sort of both sides of the nonprofit and association world now, which is really nice. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Now I have 2 kids. And so there's even more reason to do work that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've been successful and you're obviously doing something right to market yourself. And I want to come back to that. But first, I just want to ask about this kind of nonprofit mission-based world, because a lot of people assume nonprofit has no money. So tell us if that's true, or disabuse us, or explain what exactly nonprofit is, because you listed off a few different types of organizations at the beginning, but spend a little bit more time on that if you would.
Yes, definitely. So that is, something that people will say to me, like, how do you make a living working with nonprofits? Well, yes, there are some nonprofits that are really operating on a shoestring budget. Maybe they would not be the organization that would hire me. But then there are a lot of other organizations that have a budget, especially specifically organizations will get grants. So they will identify, they'll do some work in their organization, they will identify a need. So say, oh, we need to do some branding work, like in my case, we need a logo, we need a content strategy. So at that point, they're looking to maybe get a grant, to pay for that. So in that case, it's really not a situation, where people think, oh, I have to work for free, I have to discount my services. It's really finding the right organization. So it may not be that nonprofit that's, run by one person and they're doing it all, which is amazing. It will probably be a slightly larger organization that either has a budget built in for creative brand strategy or is getting a grant of some sort to cover those expenses.
And it sounds like you were talking about associations and education nonprofits, and what other kind, like what fits under that nonprofit umbrella to you?
Yes, so there's definitely the typical, 501c3, which is what we think of with nonprofits, and then associations, which are considered a nonprofit, just a different type. They're a great client base for me because, again, it's usually a larger organization. So there are maybe more needs, larger budgets. Same thing with higher ed. If I'm working with a university or some other types of higher ed organization, generally they will have some budget for marketing. So it may be, may not always be developing a brand strategy or logo design or something like that, but it might be creating maybe, digital marketing for social media, something for their website, printed materials. So, it's definitely, I have a nice mix of different types of clients. And I feel like, I'm able to work with, like I work with an association that supports, mental health. So it's really, I'm able to align with a lot of the causes and things that are important to me and that resonate with me.
Mm-hmm. And do you do all the work yourself, or do you hire freelancers to do some of it?
I do hire freelancers. I have junior designer that I work with. I also love to build teams. So I've created, now that my kids are still kind of young, they're both still in elementary school. So I don't really feel like I'm at the point where I want to create a studio of people. So I just generally put together a team. So if I get a project, I just did this recently. I was putting together a proposal. So I pulled in a couple other, another brand strategist. I quite often will bring in a market research team that might help, or a designer, maybe like a digital marketing specialist. So it's nice that this way I don't have to have the staff on hand all the time. Because of course, if I'm working, say, on an annual report, I can generally handle that design work myself. But for a larger, more strategy-based project, I would probably need to bring people in. And in that case, I can build a team. We all work together. It's great. And then we go our separate ways, and then, maybe come back together again for another project.
Mm-hmm. So how do you market yourself? What would you say is your marketing plan, and what works best?
Yes. So I will say that several years ago, I decided to really dig into my data to determine which are my top marketing channels.
And actually, let me just interrupt you there for a second. What exactly is your data?
So I look at analytics from my blog, my all my social media channels, Google Analytics for my web traffic. I have kind of a template that I've created where I sort of pull some of those, email stats as well. So I started looking at them into a little bit more depth and realized that I was getting the most traffic from email first and foremost. Like that, I've been able to do incidental research. People would reply to my emails, which is always a good sign, that you're engaging. But email was definitely at the top. Then my blog. I, again, would do like incidental research, with prospects. They would say, oh, I've been following your blog for like a year, now I want to hire you for this project. So that I could tell I was also getting traffic and engagement. And as far as social media, LinkedIn is kind of the top place for me. I think it's obvious, I'm working with professionals. I've started thinking about some video strategies, but it's really email, blog, and LinkedIn are my top three.
And when you say email, what do you mean by email? Because there's so many different types of email marketing.
Yes. So I do a monthly email, which is based on maybe a topic I've written a blog about, and kind of a general email. And then I also do some specialty email blasts, which might be related to some of the products or packages that I have. Or maybe it's like right now, Giving Tuesday's coming up. I'll probably send out a couple of emails relating to that. Basically a monthly
content marketing, you're saying, like a newsletter.
Exactly. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned products and packages. What the heck are those?
Yes. So I have recently decided to pivot my business, kind of, go into a direction where I can offer a lot of different types of branding solutions to nonprofits. At one point, I came up with a motto called Branding for All. And I really did want to make it accessible because I feel like a lot of times nonprofits are like, oh, we really, we don't have a logo, our website's not great, but what can we do about it? So I really wanted to have a way that they can come in, they can get like a DIY solution, they can get maybe like a mid-priced solution, or they can get kind of that full brand strategy package. So I launched a Canva design product where I spend an hour with the client and we put together a brand kit for them in Canva. A lot of nonprofits use Canva, so this became very relevant to me. And maybe we, talk through any questions they may have. So that was something that I launched first. That was, people were definitely interested in it. And then now I'm doing beta testing for a branding toolkit for nonprofits that you and I had spoken about, as you know. So that'll be the next one. And then I have a whole bunch of other ones that I'm kind of figuring out, how and when I will launch those.
So these sound like a kind of a combination of a product and a service, or a product and a package. And I want to especially know more about the branding toolkit. Is that something that people just buy and DIY it and do it for themselves? Or is there some kind of interaction or consulting or coaching they get from you with that? Tell us what it is.
Yes. So that one is a combination of the DIY and the interaction with me. So they get basically a digital toolkit that has, I think it's 7 worksheets that they would go ahead and, fill out. And the worksheets are based on worksheets that I've created as I've worked with my clients over the years. And they, worked really well for me. And I thought, I should really pull this all together into a toolkit. The client would go through, fill out the worksheets. There's additional resources that I have for them. And then they get a 30-minute coaching session that we can either talk about something specific that came out of the work that they've done. We can talk about just general kind of my thoughts on what I see in the worksheets. In my beta testing, it's been really great, just kind of talking to people, seeing sort of what insights they've gotten and sort of where they're going. And it's nice for them because they can say, oh yeah, now I've realized that we need to rewrite our website, or we need a new logo, or we need a brand guide. So it's nice for them to identify some of these gaps. And then, again, like maybe they're not going to do everything at once, but they can sort of prioritize, what they want to work on first. Essentially like, helping them create a good foundation for their brand.
And is this for people who basically can't afford to hire you themselves, or a step toward them hiring you, or maybe both?
Yeah, I would say both. I think if someone just buys the toolkit and they walk away, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I won't be offended. But if they do the toolkit, we talk, and they say, hey, I really would like to do this, or, A and B, can you put together a quote? Great. I would be thrilled, to work together, because I do, as I talk to nonprofits, doing this 30-minute coaching session, I get to know them. So then I get excited about, we could do this, we could do that. So ultimately, my goal, yes, it would be wonderful that they would hire me, that we would work together. But like I said, my ultimate goal is just to help them. So if they are going to walk away, try to DIY some stuff within their organization, I'm here when they need me, basically.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you've been beta testing it. So I'm curious how close it is to being ready to use. And if you would mind sharing, I'd love to know how much you're planning to sell it for.
Yes. So I would like to launch it this month. I feel pretty good about, the feedback I've gotten. And I believe around $299 was the pricing that I was looking at. And, I think that's, as you probably know, Elise, that's really the most challenging part, I think, with some of these packages or products, is really like, well, what will people pay for it? That's where the beta testing's been nice to kind of get a sense from people. And again, it's one of those situations where I know that, you could sit on a product forever and never launch it because you're constantly tweaking it. So I'm just going to get this out in time for my business anniversary. And, there may be tweaks that happen after the fact.
For sure. So, all right, then let's step back, because I'd love for you to talk about the steps you took to build it, to get here so far.
Yes. So I think the way that it all sort of came together is I realized I had all this content. Like as we've talked about, I love content marketing. It's really one of my passions. I love, writing blogs, creating worksheets, resources for people, toolkits and things. So I had started doing some of these things already with like some of my content partners. They would ask me, oh, to go along with your webinar, can you put together this toolkit? And, we'll
Wait,
it.
I'm sorry. What's a content partner?
Oh, yes. So I have a couple of organizations, or I should say companies, that I do kind of regular webinars for. They have an app for nonprofits to kind of manage their fundraising databases. And so I do a lot of webinars for them. And so they had, reached out to me like, hey, let's, put together this resource together that we can offer to the attendees of the webinar. So I have a couple of partners like that who I might do like a webinar, a series of courses, and then we'll kind of put something together to both promote that event and also be a resource for those attendees.
And so actually, let me ask you, because I think all of my listeners are going to love this idea of a content partner. How do you get content partners?
So I've had both people reach out to me, and I do a ton of outreach. So I think that the one that I'm doing probably the most webinars for, I just reached out to them. I thought, hey, I see some familiar faces on their speaker list. I'm going to ask them if they're looking for speakers. And most of these organizations, if their business is not doing workshops and webinars, they're always looking for speakers, because that's not their key. They're just, using that as kind of an extra marketing element for their business. So I think, for no matter what industry you're in, there's probably some type of partner that you can reach out to, whether it's writing a guest blog, whether it's, writing a white paper or a guide. I think there's probably a lot of potential for that for anybody who loves content and, wants to kind of get out there and share it. Because like I said, these organizations, these companies, that's not their main business. So they're happy when somebody comes. I just had reached out to somebody, an organization that I spoke for last year. They're an advocacy organization. And I just reached out to them like, hey, do you have any space in your speaking calendar? Here are some recent topics. And sure enough, like a couple days later, they're like, oh my goodness, we need a speaker for this panel in 3 weeks. Can you do it? Like, sure. So some of it is doing the outreach. Some of it is just kind of follow up. I know you've talked about this, Elise. Follow up is key.
But it sounds kind of simple. Is it really as simple as that, Lidia?
I wouldn't say it's simple. I would
Hmm.
say that it's all part of the marketing machine. I'm always, it's part of my regular marketing outreach that I
Hmm.
do is kind of following up with people that I've spoken for and then asking them, hey, do you have some dates available? Here are some topics I could speak about. Or, I just did this talk and it was really popular. Would you want me to talk about this as well?
Hmm. That's awesome. So, do you think of the speaking as a marketing tool or something else?
Yeah, I think it's both. I know that there are speaking models, and I feel like I'm not necessarily putting myself in one particular. I know there are speakers that they have a book they're selling. There's speakers that are, trying to get leads for their business, which I do. And then there's speakers that focus on income generating talks. So they're looking for that keynote that will pay, $25,000. So I feel like I'm doing a little bit of everything. So I do teach, paid courses. But then I do some, free webinars here and there. So I kind of do a mix. So some of it is really kind of hopefully bringing in some leads. And then some of it is really more of a pure kind of teaching sort of situation, which is a little more income generating rather than lead generating.
Hmm. Awesome. That sounds awesome. All right. So, let's come back to the branding toolkit.
Yes.
And I think I interrupted you in terms of the steps that you took
Oh, yes.
to build it. So,
Yeah.
pick
Yeah.
up
No.
where you left off, where I interrupted you.
Yes. So basically, I kind of, looked at all these resources that I had created over the years, gathered, worksheets that I put together and blogs that I've written. And you and I worked together, which was great because I really felt like I needed some guidance to kind of pull it together, sort of see where it would go. And then I guess sort of determining what people need. Because again, like as a creative person, it's fun to make these toolkits, it's fun to come up with products. But then you kind of lose track of what, the reason that you started it. So I think for me, I was like testing these out, these worksheets, like in my day to day work with clients. So I knew like which ones were successful, which ones people really liked and produced good results. So I kind of like narrowed it down to a couple that I thought would be good and sort of work together. And then I, ran it by a few people in the industry, just to kind of like, what do you think about this? Would this be helpful? And then put it together. I mean, honestly, like I'm a designer, but the hardest part was just designing it and putting it all together. Then the last step is really the marketing, So now I'm trying to figure out a marketing plan, for this product. So I have my Canva session. I've already got it out there and I'm promoting it on social and email through my email marketing. So now with this toolkit, I'll be doing the same thing. I'll kind of put together a marketing plan for myself, start putting it out there and see where it goes. So I think starting with really knowing what people need. So what are those pain points, with the clients that you work with? And then how can you create a tool? So it may not be like in my case, it was worksheets. For somebody else, it could be an app. It could be some sort of customized landing page, that they would use. There's a lot of different ways I could see this working for different types of people's industries. So I think the bottom line is really like, what do people need? How can you fill that need?
And do you think you would have done it the opposite way? In other words, said to yourself, I think people need a branding toolkit. I'm going to create one without having had all the worksheets and everything kind of already you using them.
I mean, that's kind of how I operate.
Mhm.
I come up with an idea like, I think people would love this. I'm going to build it or create it. But then I don't think it's always as successful because you haven't really identified the need.
Mhm.
So I think that, I do a lot of like, I talk to a lot of nonprofits, after I do webinars, people will reach out. I'll do like a, free 15-minute chat with them. And I think that's helped too, because people will literally tell me, oh my gosh, like, this is the hardest thing in our organization, or we really need help with this, or I wish we could do this. Sometimes it's not necessarily something I would address, but sometimes it is, so I have kind of good research and intel. And I think that helped with this package because, like I said, I tend to kind of go off the rails and just make something that I think is really cool. But in this case, I felt like I did really focus on what people, the things that people were responding to or said that they needed or wished that they had.
Right. Like their pain points, it sounds like
Yeah,
you're tuning
exactly.
into. Yeah.
Yep.
Is this passive income? Do you think of this as passive income, Lydia?
I do not, because
Why not?
I wish that this was passive income. I feel like, by the nature of passive income, it maybe doesn't fit the typical model. There's still the time and effort, to put into market it and sell it. I do still have to, schedule the 30-minute session, the coaching session, and maybe do some follow-up. So I don't think of it as passive income per se. There may be some things that I create that are. So for example, a course, yes, that would be passive income, an on-demand course. A live course, again, I'm doing weekly sessions or I'm doing office hours. So yeah, like I feel like I've kind of been in both scenarios. With this one, it's not necessarily passive. But maybe one day it could be a little, I'll systematize it a little bit and make it a little quicker on my end.
You seem very confident, Lydia, and I would hope after 24 years in business you would be. But have you always been? And where does your confidence come from?
Oh my goodness. I don't know.
Do you feel confident? Like if I said to you, you seem confident, are you like, yeah, I am?
I do feel confident. Sometimes I feel like not overconfident, but I feel like I look at a situation and I'm like, hey, I don't really know exactly how to do that, but I'm going to try. So I'm not really sure what that word is, but I feel like I love to grow my business and grow as an entrepreneur. And I love, love, love to learn new things. And maybe that's what gives me confidence. I also have a dad who's been self-employed for way more than I have, more than 24 years. And he is a super confident person. So it could be sort of a genetic thing.
Interesting.
But I also feel like some of it is just innate where I almost am like, hey, I'm just going to try this. Like, even though I don't maybe know exactly I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to try it because it'll be fun and challenging.
But what if you fail? What if they hate it? What if you make a mistake? Don't you care?
Well, this is something else that my dad taught me. I'm going to have to make sure he listens to this podcast. He always said, like, in business, your failures are like school, like a learning experience. Because he would say, oh, I've had all these failures, but I always learned something, or I did something differently, and I took that like, yeah, sometimes you have that situation where you don't get the job, your client ghosts you, there's so many ways you can kind of feel that rejection. But I always kind of think back to what my dad said and think about the learning experience. So, sometimes it's like, well, maybe it just wasn't the right fit. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. They would have been like difficult to work with. So I will say, again, by nature, I'm a very positive person. I try to look at the positive. I try to learn something and move on. And again, that's directly from my dad, because I know he said that to me like when I was starting my business, and he admitted like, yeah, of course I've had some failures, and you learn from it and you move on and you don't make that mistake again.
I think the word is chutzpah. That's the word I use.
Oh, I like that. Yes.
All right. Last question for you, Lydia. I always ask, are there any baby steps you would suggest someone take if they wanted to move in the direction of specifically maybe the toolkit, the product idea?
Yes, I would say just pull together, all of the content that you've created, because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So in my case, I realized I had everything I needed. I just needed to sort of pull it together in an organized fashion, make it all make sense. And there's probably other people out there that are in a similar situation. So if you've been blogging, if you've been creating, other types of content that is relevant to your audience, just literally just, copy and paste it into a document and kind of look at it and see like, where is there a pattern developing? How can you put it together? What's the theme that runs through it? I will say that was one thing I needed to do was, first I just kind of pulled a bunch of stuff, threw it together, and I was like, well, it doesn't really flow, or it doesn't make sense. So I think the first step is really just kind of looking at your body of work and seeing what could be turned into a resource. And again, like I said, be creative. Like it doesn't have to be a toolkit. It can be, a checklist. It can be an app. I love when people think out of the box and do cool things like that. But yeah, just kind of see everything you've created at a glance and what connections you can make and how you can turn it into something that's useful to people.
Awesome, Lydia. Thank you so much. I think this has been really useful to people. And tell the people where they can find you online.
Yes. So they can find me at lsvdesign.com. That's my website. I am on social media at LSV Design. So like I said, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. I'm also quite active on Facebook and Instagram. And my blog is on my website. And basically that's where to find me. And I'm always, love to connect with fellow creatives for collaborations, opportunities. So yeah, I'm happy to connect with people.
And actually, one more question comes to mind. How much time every week do you spend on marketing?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I should look. I do track
Approximately. Good.
I would say, maybe an hour, if I'm doing kind of heavy, like updating my website, it might be a couple hours, but just kind of general going into LinkedIn, scheduling some posts. Oh, I should say I don't spend a ton of time on social media and that type of marketing because I do work with a VA. I have a virtual assistant who helps with a lot of that. So nice. A lot of what I'm doing is kind of getting things ready for her. I'm doing my social media engagement. I'm kind of planning. So she puts in a little more time than I do. So that I can keep it down to maybe like an hour or two per week.
Awesome. All right, Lydia. Well, thank you again. This has been really, really helpful. And thanks for sharing what you've learned these 24 years. And congratulations on the anniversary.
Thank you so much. I realized it this morning, like, oh, my anniversary is in just a few short weeks. So it was nice timing, and I am just thrilled to be a guest on your podcast as I'm a fan of it. So thank you.
Lydia is a font of wisdom and confidence and chutzpah, isn't she? I think I might invite her on with her 93-year-old dad for our next episode. I'd love to hear what he has to share. And speaking of sharing, the baby step that Lydia suggested is this. Pull together all the content you've created, organize it, and find a thread that runs through it. Then start researching the market to find out what the market needs that your resource could provide. That's the foundation you build your products on. And that's what's worked for me, and I'm sure it will work for you too. And if you want my help finding actual clients using AI, just check out my new one-on-one AI client finding coaching calls, or you can just sign up for my quick tips at marketing-mentortips.com. Once you're on the site, you'll find lots more resources, including my simplest marketing plan. So enjoy, and I'll see you next time.